Oh, hi. Welcome to Say It, I Dare You, the podcast where we pull apart the personal meanings of taboo and hard to say words and phrases with some lovely guests and some gentle peer pressure. Today, we are talking about couples therapy. I feel like we could have done an entire episode just on the word therapy because some people find it really hard to talk about whether they go to therapy, and even some folks thinking that therapy isn't helpful or necessary. Hot take. Couples therapy is even more specific, intended for romantic partners to get counseling to help resolve problems, strengthen relationships, and so much more. I think right off the bat, it's important to normalize that, hey, I am in the best relationship I could ever imagine, and we regularly go to couples therapy. I say that because I want to take the stigma and the shame out of it at the forefront of this conversation. Usually we go monthly or every other month, but it feels like a really important relationship maintenance to us, and it's totally normal, and it's part of what makes my relationship as strong as it is. So this is a no shame space for people who need or want therapy or couples therapy or are even considering it. I'm Quinn, and today I am joined by Ramona, a therapist who works with couples and leads her counseling with energy and empathy, putting people and relationships in our lives at the forefront of her focus and her practice. So hi, Ramona. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. We have already talked so much about this topic, and I'm excited to get into it on the microphones because you have so much wisdom. So why don't we start with why you relate to this episode topic?
Of course. Well, I have for quite some time been a therapist and explored many of the topics of mental health in the work that I've done with my clients. And I've come to be inclined and fascinated by human connection in general. Mm-hmm. And relationships have become one of the topics that I just feel like is kind of impossible to stay away from, mm-hmm. because no matter what brings my clients in and what topics we talk about, it often circles back to the connections with humans. And now, mm-hmm. Relationships are not always in a romantic way, but they do kind of circle once back to intimacy and affection and wanting to be wanted and accepted. They start from when we're very little, and mm-hmm. they kind of grow. And my fascination grew in that direction. And because obviously I work with adults or young adults mainly, I find there are a couple of subjects that are very important for us around young adulthood. One mm-hmm. of them big ones being relationships, mm-hmm. and wanting to really find who we are, and amongst that, who is the person for us, mm-hmm. and who we want to spend our life with. So, I started kind of calling myself a relational therapist after some time. And that kind of got me interested in working around the topics of relationships with individuals, and then starting to get curious about who's on the other side. Mm-hmm. So then I started getting my feet wet with the couples therapy world, meaning seeing both individuals in the same room, and getting a chance to hear both stories, mm-hmm. and feel like it was starting to become a little bit more fair, having the narratives be heard from mm-hmm. both sides, and really kind of getting a full picture of what might be happening, both patterns, and allowing everyone to bring their baggage, mm-hmm. and unpacking it together. Also, it was a great opportunity for me to realize a bit more about myself, which is a bit more than just the ability to hold space for healing and for processing and unpacking emotions, but also for coaching, problem solving, mediating, mm-hmm. facilitating, and creating change in people's lives.
Yeah, for anyone who hasn't been to therapy, it's really important to note that therapy is more than just let me talk about all my problems and walk away. Oftentimes, if it's the right relationship, therapy is also what you said, problem solving and coaching and helping you pick decisions during change, and guiding you through what's right for you, not just, here's right and wrong and bad and good and give me my money. People who don't go to therapy, I think, can misinterpret what it looks like to sit in front of a therapist and talk about it. So I like that you brought it up in that way, that it's more, it's about fairness. It's about coaching. Exactly. What do you think causes people to feel like there's stigma around couples therapy specifically?
Well, I think there are some more surface level or superficial, whichever we want to really call it. And there are some deeper ones as well. Obviously, as a therapist, you always want to think about the deeper ones too.
Yeah.
But I guess more superficial ones is, admitting that you have issues with your relationship and, having to kind of come to the conclusion that there is a part of your life that you can't control, because going to couples therapy is 50% you. Right? There's 50% someone else. So I think that the stigma is what if this is more me and I'm the issue, and what is it that is making it difficult for me to get along with someone else. There's a lot of shame in terms of not being able to resolve and connect with someone. That might be internal. And there's also kind of a possibility of having this, these are all the kind of deeper ones, piece of us that sometimes feels unlovable, unworthy, and just makes us feel like that's the only concern. And so as long as we are more lovable and that, we can make ourselves somehow different, that our issues will go away. But in terms of the superficiality, I think there's kind of the sense of bouginess, right? Like, there's like a privileged sense to going to couples therapy because it doesn't sound as clinical. Yeah. Right? Like it's more so in the realm of coaching, skill building, like, just communicate with your partner. It's not like you have a diagnosis. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Because, a couple can't be diagnosed. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Even though as individuals they can. Yeah. So they have to work as a team. But that's not how it comes off in sort of, I guess you can say, the eyes of the general public, right? Yeah. So it doesn't qualify as what most people understand once they hear psychotherapy. Right. It almost feels like psychotherapy is something that a professional, even though they understand we're not medical doctors, but it's like some information we have that requires some like clinical attention, right? So I think maybe some of the stigma might be coming from what is it that two humans can't figure out that they need like a mediator, and so why psychotherapy? So I think it's just the qualifications of the concerns that doesn't sound like major depression, or borderline personality, or major issues with attachment, right? Like those more individual concerns that it's like couples therapy for what have you been diagnosed with in your relationship? Yeah. Well, nothing? And I had kind of only ever really felt in being open about going to couples therapy and proudly the stigma and the shame more so around like the perception of other people. And like, there's people that will look at that and go, well, I don't have problems in my relationship. It's almost like there's an elitist idea that if you don't have to go to therapy, it means you're not mentally ill. And I don't believe in that elitist theory, but it almost doubles when it's couples therapy, because a lot of people like to keep their relationship behind closed doors, which is respectable in some instances. But I think it also makes it so that we're not talking about couples therapy often enough to normalize it, especially like I'm pretty young. It's actually been together quite a long time, like almost 9-year relationship, but still really young. And there's not a lot of people our age going to couples therapy. And so we're kind of like breaking the ice to be like, and it's normal and it's actually kind of fun. And we have really grown as a couple because of it. But people's first assumption is, well, what's wrong with your relationship? What's wrong with you guys that you can't get along well enough that you have to go to couples therapy? It's like, actually, it was the opposite. It was for building blocks. It was for structure and comfort and safe spaces to do the hard things that make us a better couple. Yeah. There's definitely lack of education as well, I think, around, which may be another question to ponder on, but around the idea of like when to go and not just why to go,
Right.
or what's the good reason to go, but also when to go. And like, you're bringing up some really important factors, and there's a lot of research that backs up the idea of proactiveness around couples therapy, right? So when you're in a place of wanting to strengthen the foundation of a relationship, which is a complicated thing, then you're much more likely to find it a rewarding experience, to be successful in it, to do much better down the line in terms of the growth of your relationship and the challenges that will come your way. So sometimes it's just to build that kind of like foundational strength that you need for things that are going to come your way. Because I always say to my couples, and even to those who come individually for the purpose of a relationship, a romantic relationship, I say that, if you're starting your relationship at 80%, you bet you down the line the number's going to go down because the commitments are going to go higher, stress levels are going to go higher, responsibilities are going to go higher, investments in each other are going to go higher, whether that's becoming parents, financial investments, emotional investments, time. Only expectations go higher, and also you get out of the infatuation phase. Your love goes from a certain stage to another more.
Yeah.
You enter what I call the sexual habituation phase.
Yeah.
Like,
it happens.
Let's keep it real.
Yeah.
Things are not, if you're working on it, things can get better in terms of deepening.
Yeah.
But, like everything else in life, if you're not working on something, it doesn't just magically become better.
Yeah.
So I think there's also a lack of education in terms of the benefits of going into therapy with a purpose of investment.
Yeah.
Right?
So what do you think, just in your own experience, what has been kind of the catalyst for a lot of couples to start couples therapy? What's their reason? Why?
Honestly, it could be across the board. I think more and more I'm seeing amongst the like younger relationships, what I just mentioned, which is we're noticing some things are starting to become a little bit more difficult to manage between us. We're having a bit more bickering. We're not seeing eye to eye. Interestingly, I'm seeing more people coming to therapy wondering, couples therapy, whether or not their values are different at the core.
Oh, yeah. We did values work early on.
Yeah. Or if this is just something that's related to communication, miscommunication, just not really speaking to each other in a way that there's active listening, and they're just activating each other's defense. So everything's shutting down and they're not being heard. It's just not the same language that is being spoken, even though the same language is being spoken, that sort of thing. Or are they truly at the core wanting different things for their lives? Right. And I think that starts coming to the surface once again when you are at a point where you're no longer like, but that's okay. I still really like how you look like. Yeah. I still really have that oxytocin on high when I'm bonding with you. Right? Once that wears off, people are like, I don't really know if we want the same thing.
Do you feel like people will sometimes come in as like a last ditch effort? Like everything's falling apart, nothing's good, and it's like a massive hole to climb out of? Like, do you feel like people try to use it as like a Band-Aid last resort?
I have those types of clients as well.
Right.
And interestingly, motivation is equal, right? Because everybody's trying to keep it together, whether it's trying to figure out if this can work and finding a way to make it work in this particular way, meaning trying to see if there is a way to coexist even if the deepest values are not the same. And with those who are like, we have already discovered we're so different, and can we still coexist? But the process is very different. I would say very honestly that the amount of work that you have to do when you're coming to therapy as a couple, with this being like kind of the last hope for you before you are going to separate, there's a lot more work. There's history. it's kind of like bricks upon bricks that we now have to take one at a time, kind of away, unpack, work through, work on the next, work on the next, work on the next, versus someone who's kind of coming to stack the brick.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a lot of work. Like one of the big things that we worked through, and it's like it's surface level, so I'm comfortable sharing it, was just discrepancy in household chores, which I think every couple has experienced in the eternity of couplehood.
Of course.
It is what it is. It's hard to figure out. And I think we tried 15 different philosophies, calendars, method, lists, whatever we could. But the fact that we were both showing up and trying, and now we have a system that works for us that we literally brag to our friends about. Because I'm like, we haven't argued about laundry in years. You're like, it can happen, friends. You just have to spend 8 years getting there.
Right.
But what it was to us was kind of this eye opener of even those like small things. There's air quotes for people who aren't watching. Small things. Try after try after try to remove that brick and to really get down to like, how can we do this for both of us? Do you find that when you have two people in front of you, I know someone who used to say that in a negative connotation, therapists are just validation machines, which I think maybe the wrong one for you might be, but is it hard having two people in the room and having to balance that like validation of how somebody's feeling while also being like, and if you're gonna stay together, you got to work together? Is it hard to balance the two dynamics?
I definitely find that was the one thing that made me feel like I can remain a couples therapist. And I also find that's one thing that many of the therapists whom I work with who say couples work is not for me cannot balance.
Oh.
Because we do have therapists in our therapy world amongst us therapists, and hey, we're all human, and in our own field, we have our own strengths. And some of us are very much so empathy, hold space, and more what we call Zen therapists. And we're really awesome at that. And there is definitely people who need a lot of that. And then we have therapists who are a little bit more proactive, change, problem solving, and kind of moving the client across their therapeutic journey, which can happen in individual and couple. However, what works best for couples therapy specifically is movement. No couple comes just for a safe space. In fact, majority of the time I find if a couple comes for a number of sessions and the session continues to end, once again, after a few sessions, I got to get it out of their system, right?
Yeah.
Especially if what I call it's a high conflict couple. But after certain reasonable amount of sessions and hearing their story, seeing their dynamic of argument and letting them let it out, you're just getting the same thing happen over and over again. You're not seeing them again because no one's going to pay to argue over and over again, right? They are going to want to see results. So I think what has worked, at least for me and my clients in terms of my work as a couple therapist, is yes, there has to be a connection between you and your therapist in terms of knowing they care about you, knowing that there is trust in terms of knowing that they can help you, knowing they're skilled at what they do, and knowing that they have the care for the relationship to go in a direction that's good for each of the partners. But that's not the kind of empathy and safety and validation and connection that you have with your individual therapist.
Right.
Why? Because the client in couples therapy is the relationship. It's not you or your partner. The client is the relationship. So the best thing is supposed to happen for the relationship, whichever direction it goes.
Interesting. So it's almost like removing it in a sense from the individual and making it more about the thing that they've both come in to work on. When you said it's about movement, do you mean like forward movement, like attempts at the next type of cleaning schedule to overcome this disagreement? Is that what you mean by movement?
What I mean by movement is any direction that allows both individuals to feel content.
Mm.
Movement can also mean movement towards closure of separation.
Right.
In the way that I work with couples, I'm very straightforward. I'm not biased in keeping people together or keeping them apart. I think what is important is to fall into the process, take action, and know that you're moving towards something that's making you feel like, okay, I'm getting somewhere.
Yeah.
Because being in a relationship that's not bringing you happiness and it's not the right place anymore for you is just as horrific.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm here to bring clarity and to see if we can work towards, once again, better some of mental health of both individuals and the health of the relationship. Right? So if I have a client that comes in and says, we really want to stay together and that is our absolute goal, we work towards that direction.
Yeah.
And it's their journey. And within that journey and our efforts, it's for them to figure out if they want to maintain that goal throughout the journey. Sometimes they're like, you know what, Ramona? Do you think we should keep that goal? I am like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was your goal. So why is this question coming up? What makes you rethink your original plan? And then we talk about it.
Yeah, it's encouragement to actually talk about what you're already feeling, not encouragement to be anything other than what you are, which I think is important in a room with many different feelings and thoughts and history, and people tapping into what it means for them to show up to couples therapy is a really good, it's been important in our journey too. And I think like this perspective that you're sharing on this podcast, it's important for people to kind of hear from a couples therapist, like what the process actually looks like, because a lot of the stigma around therapy is assumption of bias, assumption of lack of understanding. Some people really struggle to connect with a therapist who's maybe a different race or gender or sexuality from them. Other people really succeed with a therapist who's completely different from them because they need someone who's like a different perspective on life than the one that they have. So I like that you're sharing kind of these inside thoughts about the process of how you approach these things, because I think it is those details that helps with the stigma, that helps with kind of the overarching purpose of the podcast, which is to talk about like, why does this word suck? Why do people hate talking about it? Well, because we don't get it yet. People who aren't in it don't understand it. How do you how does one pick the right couples therapist? Big question, but
it's a big question, and it's a great one, because it's also I would say the pillars similar to how do you pick a therapist in general. But I think there's also a lot of differences that some don't consider when they're going to kind of consider that couples therapist. One of the things that I will say that I think is a big one that's similar and then different, and then I'll explain what I mean by that and why I say that, is all of us have heard this at some point on social media, by a friend, read in a book, or somewhere we've come across therapeutic rapport, connection with your therapist. 90% of the success of therapy is based on the connection and how you feel with your therapist and how comfortable you are. No doubt. That has to be there. But, as I like kind of slightly mentioned as we were discussing a somewhat different topic, yes, you do have to have trust that the therapist that you're working with, whether it's an individual or couple therapist, has the knowledge, the skills to get you there, has the ability to manage the session, to move you forward, and to create that space that you are hopeful will bring about the results that you're looking for. In individual therapy, you are healing through that relationship with your therapist. It's between you and your therapist, and it's very much so of, because I do trauma work as well, surprise, surprise, in relationships, what happens, trauma. So I'm obviously going to have that under my belt. But to bring it back to the point is that the connection is between two people. But that rapport in a couple setting is complicated by a couple of factors. One is you have two people in the room, right? So, not including the therapist, as the individuals who are working on their concerns, there's two, right? So that automatically changes the dynamic. Another thing to consider is when couples come into therapy, regardless of whether they're high conflict or they're just trying to proactively work on something, there are things that we're talking about that are not working. So that is going to activate emotions that has to do with conflict, issues with communication, not seeing eye to eye, maybe not the most happiest moments. So what ends up happening in the dynamic of couples therapy is that the emotion that's experienced in the therapy room for your partner is going to be projected onto your therapist. So you're are much less likely to like your couples therapist the same way you will like your individual therapist.
Interesting.
There is going to be a sense of resentment at some point, or maybe a sense of heaviness towards your couples therapist. Some sessions, I'm not saying all sessions, also depending on the nature of the dynamic of your relationship and your partner that's coming into the room, but it's very normal, because that's also how I define, to some extent, love, right? If you and your partner are constantly in environments that are consisting of conflict, you will associate that feeling with how you feel towards your partner. So, unfortunately, if you're going through a week of, having the flu and all you're doing is spending time with your partner, you kind of feel some type of way about him or her.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's just like, the
you're
brain
in my
associates
space, I don't feel good, whatever it is.
It's an association.
Yeah.
So I always like to remind clients when they're picking their couples therapist is, if you don't love him or her as your couples therapist, that's not a bad thing at all, because you are projecting a lot of conflict in those sessions for someone else onto another human that's holding that space. So the way in which rapport works with a couple therapist is different. So a little tip that the next time you're looking for a couples therapist, look more for how helpful they are for your relationship versus how much you actually like them. Because they're not here to heal you individually.
Yeah.
Their mission is to work on, remember, your relationship.
Yeah.
That's the client.
Yeah.
You are not the client.
Yeah.
Even though you are, but you're 50% and then your partner's 50%, right? So I think this is a big one, because a lot of people are like, well, I didn't like her.
Yeah.
Well,
why,
right? Yeah. And look into that. Now, with that being said, I also like to mention this. Make sure that the couples therapist that you pick has the ability to be extremely neutral.
Yes.
There's no side taking. There's no connecting emotionally with one person versus the other. Therapists are human. Some have a harder time doing this, right? So as a couples therapist, I have, built an enormous amount of skill set, training to make sure that I am not projecting any of myself in terms of how I relate to anybody's story.
Yeah.
That is different,
yeah.
right? So if you're like, well, I don't feel the rapport, but my partner feels completely connected, that's an issue, right? Nobody should feel specially connected.
Yeah.
That's
because then you're just adding another divide in a place where there's already enough conflict.
Everybody should feel neutral, but no one should feel that same therapeutic rapport that they feel with their own therapist. That's why you should still have your own therapist when you're in couples therapy, because they serve different purposes. So you can't look. It's almost like you're saying like, I have a wife or a husband, and so I don't need a best friend. Yeah. No, wrong. They don't do the same thing.
They don't. They're different. Right? Yeah. We have a powerful team of 3, one each, and then our couples therapist, and it has worked for us for a long time. And I think I can't go without saying it's a privileged position to be in, that I have the benefits to allow for that. And if you have it, don't walk away from it because you don't want to try. I think I've seen, or I guess heard, kind of hot takes about people who have maybe stigma around couples therapy and then do it anyway because my partner told me they wanted me to do it. Do you feel like that stigma can sometimes affect how people show up in the room when in couples therapy?
Oh, 100%. And I also feel like an alignment between the two sometimes is not there either, in terms of the way they see therapy, the way they want to engage in therapy, the amount of efforts that they bring into therapy. So those are all things that need to be factored, and those are all the responsibility of the therapist to navigate and to point out. So couples therapy is confrontational. In fact, the other day, a little story, because sometimes I feel like people wonder what happens in the therapy room with couples. I know my client gets very triggered by being asked about anything relating to what kind of parent she is. And her husband takes that very personally because he thinks it's just an attack to him. Every time he says anything, she just gets triggered. So I said something very mild, and she lost it on me.
Interesting.
And we managed it. We kind of worked through it. We conversed through it. And then after it was done, I said, and then she said, I'm sorry, I got triggered and I overreacted. And I said, there's absolutely nothing to be sorry about. How interesting it is for all of us to learn today that this is nothing personal. It doesn't matter who says it.
Yeah.
This is just a trigger to you. So I guess today, Mr. X finally saw that it's not just him.
Yeah.
Because as far as I know, you like me, don't you?
Yeah. It's an eye-opening experience, and I think people who walk into couples therapy, that stigma, I think I could imagine it would really hinder situations, because I think you have to be willing to put a mirror in front of yourself. Like, if you're there to fix the relationship, that means both of you need fixing. Not fixing, but you know what I mean. Both of you have work to do and changes to make. And sometimes I full on, like, I'm just confidently, comfortable with my therapist at this point. So sometimes they'll say something to me and I'll go, I don't like that you said that. I'm listening to you, but that made me sad or whatever. And like, it's just the feeling and the emotion. But sometimes it's hard to hear someone be like, you're being a little over dramatic. Maybe like, fuck, you're right. I'm sorry. Like, but that's what you do that for, is to be a better person, to be a better partner, to be a better parent. Like, I wonder, like, now you and I talked a little bit before recording, and I guess we've talked a bit about therapists are human beings. They are not invincible. They are not incapable of having their own discrepancies with their partners, their own struggles. Do you feel like that's understood by the general public, or is it maybe kind of, there's a bit of a mask in front of therapists?
I definitely say that also a divide in that. I think there are some who are very understanding of that. And what I mean by that is they have a good grasp of the fact that, obviously therapists are human and they have their own challenges, and they don't necessarily dig in or look for therapist personal information to assess, for whether they're a good fit for them, or just generally the type of therapist that they are and how they practice. And then we have some who do think that, well, a therapist who can't manage, their own personal life, whether it's relationship or their mood or just really parenting, anything, then they are not at a position to be able to help anyone else.
Right.
I've had, actually, interestingly, a couple of clients ask me if I've been in therapy before and what I think about that. And never really too many personal questions per se. But I think it's a very interesting thing to note, because a very simple example, I think, will put this into perspective. And that is, if you are going through a breakup, would you want to talk about that with a friend who has had a few breakups or even a divorce, and kind of grew from that, learned from that, navigated it, and maybe can kind of speak on it to you? Or would you go to, your 15-year-old friend or someone who hasn't really stepped into that
married
world,
their high school sweetheart, is still there 40 years later,
and say, what do you think about this? Right? So kind of bringing that back into your therapist. Obviously, your therapist has had some psychological information, experience, and education and training.
Human beings.
Yes. But at the same time, if they have some personal experience with something, that also adds character to them.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's nothing wrong with utilizing wisdom from your personal life, as long as you don't project from your own life onto another, which most therapists, hopefully, fingers crossed, have had, enough practice and learned how to do what we call effective use of self, then that shouldn't happen, and usually, a senior therapist and, qualified therapists of all kind know how to manage the objectivity piece. But that's how I put it. I say that, if you're a couples therapist and you've been divorced or you're challenged in your relationship, this has nothing to do with your qualifications to help someone else, right? Yeah. First, your story is completely separate. Yeah. Like any job, you don't take your, personal life into your job. Second, in fact, it adds a little bit more wisdom, if anything. Yeah. However, I will say that for most therapists, and this is just to give a little reassurance, I guess, to people, and that is, if there is a topic of trigger, and if a therapist is actively going through something that's extremely triggering to them, they do not work with that topic for a certain period of time until that is resolved. And most therapists will have an active therapist to work through that particular topic that they are not able to work with themselves during that chapter of their life. Right. This is what you should do as a responsible therapist. Yeah. So if they say they're working with something, they're working with something. Yeah. Therapists go to therapy. It's normal. Therapy's normal. 100%. In fact, it's probably more necessary as we hold a lot of space inside of us. Like the way I like to describe it to my clients, because I've always had these questions, especially from my couples, and they're like, how do you do all this? How do you remember all of our stories and manage all? I say, well, I have a locker for every person in my heart and my mind, and you each have a key. When you enter my space, you put your key in, you open it, we see the material, we work with it. Once you leave, you close it, you take your key, and that's it. And lockers don't get mixed up. They're all unique. Yeah. They have their own key, stickers, and decoration, and everything of your locker is different. So that's kind of a little bit also of how, like, things don't just get mixed up. Personal with others. Yeah. At least that's how it is. Therapy is intentional and practiced and professional. Yeah. And I think people who mistake therapy for just like the same as talking with your friend, don't get me wrong. A good yap over a good dinner does me equally as well, but in different forms. It's it's a different kind of therapy. But I think the balance of all of those things is really important. I'd love to know, just as we wrap up, like what sort of resources you would suggest for people who are trying to take this topic and make it feel normal, whether that's because they are trying to come up to the courage of finding a therapist or going to couples therapy, or just like, are allies and want to make sure that other people feel comfortable. How would you suggest we keep normalizing it in our society? Great question. Well, first and foremost, if it's something that they want to explore on a more personal level, take advantage of complimentary consultations. At least for me, and many of the therapists that I know of, trusted colleagues of mine, we all offer the complimentary consultations via phone, video, any means you like. So if you don't want to show your face and you just want to kind of hear a couple of things about your unique situation, and you don't even really want to share names and just kind of go with initials, we don't need much information to offer you a consultation, right? So, and if you want to dive in and once again, do a video and kind of get a feel of how it could be to sit in that space. You get 20 minutes complimentary to kind of, once again, just experiment, like just feel it out and see if it's for you. And it might take a couple of tries with different people as well, but at least you're breaking sort of that sort of idea of like, oh my God, like, this challenging thing. It's becoming more real. So consultations are always a good way. Second thing that I'm starting to do, I did one last year, which was actually pretty successful, and hoping to do more this year, is workshops that are related to topics that have to do with couples.
Right.
So I'm trying to kind of break it down monthly for couples. Like 1 month is about intimacy. Another month might be communication issues. Another month might be parenting challenges. Another might be finances, how to bring back romance.
Right.
How to know if this is the one. How to know if once again we've gone to a place where we should consider therapy, like all kinds of topics, and break them down into months. And then each month we'll have like couple of dates for the same topic for people to come for free workshops.
Right.
And it'll be on Zoom. We'll present some informative, like kind of psychoeducation, we call it, information. And then we'll have some time for people to ask questions, whether it's in the chat box or live. We'll do it on Zoom. And I think it's a great way not only for people to ask questions, but to hear. To hear about like real other people and what they are struggling with and what they're thinking around the same topic. So it's not just so varied either. And I think that is something that's missing right now, is there's just not enough resources and talk, and again, normalization of like just couples coming around.
I really like that process of it, because it's almost like you get to put one foot in the pool. Like you're not jumping in feet first into like sitting in a room with a stranger and talking. It can be hard, but instead it's like you're wading into the water a little bit. You're going to a workshop, you're talking about it. Maybe you're trying a few things at home before you choose to do couples therapy, but couples therapy is on the maybe list if these things don't feel good. And like those more accessible ways to allow couples to normalize those things, and non-couples to just like see it on LinkedIn or see it posted somewhere and be like, oh, this is available. People do this and it's fine. I think that's important. Even little things like my partner and I we had been suggested by our couples therapist to do this like values exercise where we kind of rank our values. There's like a big list of all the different things that could be values, and we rank them, and then we talk about what our rankings was, and we have a look at what we found were equal and have a look at what we found were very, very different. Surprise, surprise. Acts of service and cleaning the house, top of the list for me, bottom of the list for her. We figured it out though, because we did those exercises, but now we do them every year for fun. Nobody's telling us to do it. Couples therapist has been like, you don't need to, but we do it to check in. Have our values changed? Do we feel aligned with these things? It's an accessible way for us to continue that work, or I guess for some people to start it, especially now with the internet. There's so many resources available, and you don't have to pay for it. You don't have to feel as scared.
Yeah, 100%. And there's like lots and lots of activities that, can be accessed by some self-help books for couples. I've got quite a big list. We'll probably run out of time if I were to introduce all of those, but there are things that we can do little by little, and sometimes it's just asking one another to think about the things if we were to go to therapy, kind of thing. If we were to go to therapy, what do you think would be some of the things that you would want to talk about? And give our partner, let's say you have 3 days, I have 3 days, and then we'll come once again, dinner or TV time or one evening, and kind of exchange our lists, and then see if that surprises you or your partner, because there are a lot of times that I see like couples just unaware.
Yeah.
Like, because the thing is, especially with long-term relationships, we stop getting curious.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where problem starts arising, because when curiosity goes down, one thing that goes up is judgment.
Yeah.
Because when you stop getting curious, you're making assumptions.
Yeah. We always kind of joke in our friend group. I mean, I'm in a same-sex relationship, so are a lot of our friends, and we kind of have this, I guess, poking fun joke of like, I can't believe how many heterosexual couples don't talk about things. And the big one is like that there are some people who their boyfriend gets down on one knee and proposes, and they had no idea. It's fine that it was a surprise, but truly had never spoken about ever getting engaged before. I'm like, what do you mean? How do people get there? But it's not normalized for some people, right? And it just is in our inner circle, and I think we've cultivated those friends on purpose. But it's a bit of it's not funny. I'm sure it's incredibly weird for some people, but it's funny to look at and be like, how do you not?
I know what you mean.
I don't know how you don't do it. But anyway, this has been such a lovely conversation, Ramona. Thank you for being here.
I very much so enjoyed speaking about, like, honestly, every part of it. And I think there's, obviously, as you said in the beginning, like, there's lots and lots to talk about, but hopefully we kind of scratched the surface of like a lot of the important things. And once again, I enjoyed speaking about the topics that we did. And if there was any additional resources that I could share, I'd be happy to. And I
can make sure they go in the description, and I'll that follows into my next question of where can people find you online if they want to access kind of your resources or things like that.
So they can feel free to go on to the website. I do have right now kind of the website being wamped up, and there's some videos that are actually going to come up that are also informative about couples. And there's also my email address that they can email me and get more information and subscribe and or not I guess subscribe, and I can send them the newsletter. So that's our Baston Counseling at gmail.com. And there's also my Instagram, which is our Baston Counseling. So I would say those two. I believe the link to the website is also ourbaston.com. I'll have to double check, but I would say rely on the first two.
I'll make sure they're in the show notes. I'll check in with you and we'll make sure they're in the show notes.
Because I just put the website link in there. And go on my website. But it's our Baston Counseling for the IG. And anyways, if they go on the IG, they'll find everything else as well there.
Okay. I'll make sure I send people there. If you're interested in getting connected with Ramona, you can do so there. You can follow us at Say It I Dare You Pod on Instagram and on TikTok. Also, if you don't mind downloading these episodes on whichever devices you've got, wherever you're listening, as well as leaving a review, it does really help us with the podcast. So thanks again for listening. Thanks again, Ramona, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, friend.